Hi, I'm Dennis Colwell. I currently live in Foxborough, Massachusetts, and I served in the armed forces from 1967 to 1971 during the height of the Vietnam War.
Hi, Mr. Colwell. Why did you join the service, or were you drafted, and how old were you?
Okay, well, I joined the service because my brother talked me into it. He had just gotten out of the Air Force after serving 4 years, and at the time I was just working. I wasn't going to school, and they were instituting the draft. So he said, instead of getting drafted maybe into the Marines or the Army, I just got out of the Air Force. Why don't you join the Air Force, where it's a very good duty and you get to travel and so forth. So I said, that's fine with me. So I signed up for 4 years in the Air Force, and it's a good thing I did because my number come up high. I would have been drafted right away.
What were you doing before you joined the service?
I was working at a local restaurant one town over from here in Walpole, and I was a pizza cook.
What branch of service did you join? Air Force.
I joined the United States Air Force.
How did your parents feel about you joining the service?
My stepfather was all for it. He thought it was a good idea, but my mother, as mothers would be, wasn't for it at all.
Where did you do your basic training?
Well, a little bit interesting story there. We did our basic training in Amarillo, Texas, and the reason for it, there was a big hepatitis breakout in Lackland Air Force Base where they train the Air Force people. They're always trained in Lackland, and for the first time they had to open up a condemned base. The base was condemned, it was not being used, and they put us in these barracks that were condemned and they were filthy. So the first thing you do was had to clean everything. So we ended up going to Amarillo, Texas, which was up in the Panhandle, which was really a pit.
Was there a culture shock on your part, meeting people from all over the country?
Definitely there was a culture shock. Yeah. I'd never really met anybody from the South, and as soon as they started talking, my roommate was a African American from North Carolina, and that was a culture shock for me because I grew up in a town that was predominantly white. Growing up, we never had any African Americans in my high school, so that was the first time I really had to deal with an African American. He was my roommate, and for both of us it was a bit of a culture shock.
Do you have any other interesting stories from basic training?
No real interesting stories. Basic training was just, it seemed like it went on forever, but when it was over, you wondered how fast it went by. It was like, when you're doing it, it seems like it's forever. Mm-hmm. It was for 6 weeks, but when it ended, you said, wow, that went by pretty quick. The only thing I can tell you from basic training is, out of our squadron, there probably was 1/3 of them that didn't make it with the class, and they had to retrain. So that's really all I have to say about that. Forrest Gump.
What was your military occupational specialty?
Okay. I was in the 313th Tactical Air Command, and basically I worked for the Staff Judge Advocate Office and the base commander. And what that meant is I dealt with all the bad apples. Anybody that was court-martialed, got Article 15, reprimands, I dealt with all that. I did all the paperwork for it, and I was in the courtrooms and stuff for that.
You mentioned your brother being in the service. Did you have any other family members that were in the service prior to you two?
No, prior to my going in, my father, who died when I was young, he was in the service for 2 years.
In what branch?
He was in the Navy.
Did you know that the government was lying to the American public back home about what was going on?
No, I was 19, kind of naive. I didn't really know what was going on or anything like that. No.
Were your officers as bad as they were portrayed in the movies?
No, I found my officers to be pretty fair, actually, and I was friendly with a lot of them. I had to deal with officers all the time in my AFSC, which was what I just told you. That's the job description. So I dealt with officers on a continuing basis, day in and day out, and I didn't find them to be abrasive or anything else. I got along fine with them.
Did you hate the hippies in college since or back home?
No, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to that. I mean, I remember when all that stuff erupted at Kent State, where the students were shot and killed and stuff like that. I was aware of everything that was going on, but it didn't affect me when I was in the military. It's funny how that works. When you're in the military, you really kind of distance yourself from that. The only time you might see it is when we went over to Kansas University in Lawrence when I was stationed in Kansas. We went to a couple of basketball games over there, and we saw a little bit of that. But other than that, when I was on the bases and stuff, I never really saw anybody. I didn't pay much attention to it.
Did you have any close friends that were killed or wounded?
I had a number of friends that went to high school with me that played on the football, baseball, and basketball teams that didn't return. Terry Baldwin, Gillespie, probably about a half dozen to a dozen men that went to high school with me that didn't come back from the Vietnam War.
Speaking of highs and lows of the war, were drugs prevalent in anywhere that you went?
Drugs weren't really prevalent stateside, but when you went overseas, they were readily available. And when people would come back from Vietnam, they would be telling you that you could pretty much get anything you wanted while you were serving over there.
How were you treated when you got home?
When I finished my 4 years, I went right into the workforce. I didn't even skip a beat. And I don't recall anybody giving me a hard time about anything. Actually, when my military career ended after 4 years, that was actually, I was home only maybe a week or two when Saigon fell, and we evacuated and got everybody out of the embassy. So pretty much the war was coming to an end at that point.
Do you feel the Vietnam War was a mistake?
Yes,
Can you
definitely
explain?
a mistake. We lost far too many men for a war that we didn't win. I figure if you're going to get involved in a war, you might as well finish it, and you shouldn't. Well, it's probably one of the only wars I feel is that we have really lost. So for that reason alone, I feel like too many lives were wasted because we didn't finish the mission.
Do you have an idea of how the war could have been won in Vietnam?
I think there was too many restrictions put on the soldiers. If they had probably gave them more leeway, and the officers more leeway to command the men, things that were a little bit more different and they didn't put restrictions on them and keep their thumb on them so much, I think that they could have ended it a lot sooner.
What were the conditions like where you were stationed?
Okay, I had it pretty good. I only got assigned to Vietnam in my second year in the military. What happened was the assignment section came down with an order for me to go to Tan Son Nhut Air Base outside Saigon area. And at the time, my daughter from my first marriage, Lisa, my oldest child, my wife at the time was pregnant, and she was like 8 months along. And if there's a condition, there was a condition at that time that if you get orders to the combat area and you're married and your wife is more than 7 months pregnant, they cancel the orders. So the orders were canceled, and then eventually, after Lisa was born, they sent me to Madrid, Spain, Toron Air Base.
Do you have any other stories that you would like to tell us about what you did?
Well, the only thing that I found interesting was I was a member of the Tactical Airlift Command 313 Squadron, the C-130s, the transport planes. And in the middle of the night, what they'd do is they'd do a base alert, and you'd have to get so much time to get to the base and to the airstrip, and you'd load the cargo and off you'd go. You'd strap on the floor into the C-130, and you'd had no idea where they were bringing you or where you were going. But it was all about response time to see how quickly you could be in a location on a moment's notice. That's really the only experience I had with flying in the Air Force, and you know, feeling as though you might be going to a combat area. So that was it. The only other thing I did do, though, late in my 4-year career, I was asked to join the Honor Guard. So I was in the Air Force Honor Guard. So what I did was I did a lot of military burials. So we were bused to a lot of locations in the Midwest, because at the time I was stationed in the Midwest, and we would go, there was 10 of us, and we would go perform the duties for when a soldier came back, or Air Force, an airman came back from Vietnam, and he had died in combat. We were on the Honor Guard when he was buried. We were there for the family and all that. I found that to be very interesting.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Colwell. This is going to be on record with the Wentworth Institute of Technology, and we'd just like to thank you for taking your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.